What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most unique lenses to hit the market this past year, the Viltrox 28mm f4.5, a $99 ultra-compact fixed aperture prime lens that might just be the perfect lens for street photography. I've had the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 for a few months now, and I've used it in a variety of scenarios, from architecture and street photography to taking photos of my pets. In this video, we'll see if the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 lives up to the hype, or whether its limitations are deal breakers. First, let's get my disclaimers out of the way. This lens was a Christmas gift from a close friend last December. I have no relationship with Viltrox, monetary or otherwise, and as far as I know, they have no idea I exist. As always, my thoughts and opinions are my own, and I will try to be as unbiased and impartial as possible. Let's go ahead and get into the review, starting with the physical design and the build quality. The lens is incredibly compact, barely larger than a lens cap. I can easily fit my Sony a6700 with this lens into a cargo pant jacket pocket. The lens mount is metal, while the housing is made from high-quality plastic. There is no manual focus ring, so you are limited to autofocus only. Also, while there is an integrated lens cover built into the lens, which can be opened or closed by the switch here, there are no filter threads, so there's no way to mount a lens hood, lens cap, or ND filter out of the box. With that said, AltCine has designed a 3D printable filter attachment that allows you to mount circular filters to the lens. This could be useful if you intend to use this lens for video, but as we'll get into later in the review, I don't necessarily recommend this lens for that. I will leave a link to the STL in the video description though. There is a USB-C connection on the rear lens mount for firmware updates. I should mention that you have to use Viltrox's mobile app to update the firmware on this lens, which is not ideal. I would much prefer to be able to update the firmware on this lens by just dragging and dropping the firmware update from my computer onto the lens like I can with my Viltrox 75mm f1.2 Pro lens. A couple of other things to note are that this lens optical element protrudes below the lens mount when not in use, so be aware that resting the lens on a surface without the rear lens cap could result in scratching the lens element. Also, remember to open the integrated lens cover before powering on your camera. The lens element extends to focus, and you don't want it pressing up against the closed cover. If you're enjoying the video, a like and subscribe would mean a lot. It really helps the channel grow. In terms of optical performance, my main takeaway from using this lens is that it's surprisingly sharp for such a cheap lens. On an APS-C size sensor, I can't notice a whole lot of difference in sharpness from the center of the frame compared to the corners. I have seen in reviews from other creators using this lens with full-frame cameras that the edges of the lens coverage are a bit softer than the center, so keep that in mind if you intend to use this lens on a full-frame camera. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to colors and contrast straight out of the camera, because I always shoot in RAW, and I always apply some degree of post-processing to my photos, even if it's just a Lightroom preset. There is a tiny bit of pincushion distortion, which is easily fixed with profile corrections in Lightroom. The most noticeable optical flaw is the significant vignetting, even on an APS-C size sensor, although again, this is easily fixed in Lightroom. As for bokeh, there isn't much with an f4.5 aperture unless you are really close to your subject. Even if you do get up close in a portrait shot, the bokeh quality is pretty rough. The bokeh balls are roughly octagon-shaped, and there are noticeable onion ring artifacts in the bokeh. However, it is possible to get a reasonable amount of background blur, assuming you are shooting right up in your subject's face, which is very possible given the minimum focus distance of 1.5 feet. One distinctive attribute of this lens are the sun-star flares from bright light sources. I quite like these, but I have a feeling that this particular flare pattern is going to be polarizing. I don't find that the flares noticeably reduce contrast, but I seem to be in the minority in that opinion. Autofocus is probably the most frustrating aspect of this lens for me. I find that it can really struggle to work with subject recognition on my Sony a6700 indoors or in lower light conditions. Maybe my expectations are a bit high, but eye tracking with this lens leaves a lot to be desired. This makes it very challenging to rely on the Viltrox 28mm f4.5 for video work. Weirdly enough, I've had much better luck using animal subject recognition with this lens as compared to human subjects. I really hope that Viltrox can continue to improve the autofocus performance on this lens with further firmware updates. Depending on your camera, it is possible to use this lens in a wider variety of settings than you might think, based on the fixed f4.5 aperture. I've pushed this lens and my camera to the limit, shooting night street photography between 10,000 and 512,000 ISO that, after AI-based denoising with DxO Pure RAW, resulted in a mostly usable set of images, but I think that architecture, landscapes, and daytime street photography are where this lens truly shine. With this lens and a compact camera, you can operate with a truly minimal footprint. Honestly, one of my main drivers in asking for this lens as a gift was to make it more possible for me to carry my main camera with me regularly as opposed to just carrying my smartphone. And I think that's ultimately the point of getting this lens. It's not a replacement for a real prime or a nifty 50. But if you always want to have your camera with you, I think that this lens is a great way of making that happen. What do you think, though? Is this lens ultimately just a novelty? Would you rather just use your smartphone camera if you can't carry a prime lens or a standard zoom? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching until the end of the video. I really appreciate your support. There's plenty more to come, so please subscribe so that you don't miss out on what's coming next. Until next time, this is Bedrock Reviews, signing off.